In this video, I want to explain the concept of absolute, relative, and mixed referencing, a column mixed and a row mixed. So this is what the syntax looks like, and you guys can use the function key F4 to toggle between the different states of reference. So what we have here is a spreadsheet of a company, hypothetical company, with a variety of items. They currently have just made them sequential just so it looks a little bit easier to calculate. And what they've done is they want to increase all of their prices by an inflationary factor. So let's say that all the prices, they want to increase it, but what they're really targeting is they want to calculate what is the new GST fee and what is the new PST fee going to be on all their products. A company might have to submit a GST or PST report, so they want to know what that value is going to be. So what we're going to do is we could do this manually. Now I could say equal to $100 times 5, and then we can multiply that. Well, actually, we don't want to multiply. What am I times? Let's go with add, and then we could multiply that by 7. But because of the BEDMAS rules of order here, we want to make sure that we put everything in brackets before we do the multiplication. And we come back and it says $7.35 will be the new GST once the inflationary factor of $5 has been applied to the prices. And if I copy this down, because I never used the proper mixed references, this is what happens. So if you don't know how absolute, relative, and mixed referencing works, you would have to write that formula individually all the way down. Now, sometimes people know how relative and absolute works, but they don't know how the mix works and what the nuance between the two are. So let's write this again with just knowing a little bit about absolute. So we could say, let's go equal to, this time I'll put in the bracket. I'll say I want the $100 plus the $5 inflation factor. And the inflation factor, I know I'm always going to refer back to that. So I'm going to make that an absolute. So I'll push the F4 key, which locks it in as an absolute factor. And then I'm going to multiply that by the GST. And again, I know what that's an absolute. We always use 7%. It doesn't matter what item it is. So I'll lock that in and I'll calculate it and come up with the same number. Okay, now let's copy that down, and it looks like it worked this time. Let's just double check. So I click on the bottom here and it says that last item of $210 plus the $5 multiplied by the GST looks correct. So a lot of students, they think, okay, well, I know how this works. But now if I copy this from here to here, copy it across, and then copy down. So I'll copy, oops, let's go back one here. Let me just double click on this one. And you might think, oh, that's the PST. I just copied it from here, from D3 to E3. And it looks maybe close, but not sure. But let's double check. We open it up. We say, okay, do we want D3 added to the inflation? Do we want the GST added to the price? No, we want the actual price added to the inflation factor first, and then before we multiply it by the PST. So right away, this price is wrong. This should be actually column C. So I have to go in and modify that. And then the absolute value inflation factor here is $5. That looks correct. And then absolute D2, which is the GST, but I'm in the PST column. So this would have to go to E2. All right, so I'll put an E in there. And that looks a little bit better because you can kind of do the math in your head. $105 times 5%, $5.25. So my point there is we've had to go in and redo this. So I don't want to have to go through that process. So I'm going to take all of this out, and I'm going to take all this out. Do it once properly using absolute, relative, and mixed referencing, and then copy it through the entire set. Now, you might think, well, that's not really a big deal. I could just do what's in column D. But if you've got 1,000 items, or you've got 1,000 columns that you're going this way, this just doesn't work. You have to do mixed referencing. All right, so let's do that properly now. Equal to. Now, I'm going to take the $100. Now, everything you should think about, is it relative or absolute? So, of course, the $100 is going to be good for this record, but when I drop down to the next record, I want 110. So I want the rows to be relative. But when I copy this from GST over to PST, I want the column to be locked. So in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the column but I want the row to be relative. All right, so remember when I copied this, I'm on D3 here. If I copy this formula over to E, I want the column to be locked because I always want to be referring to this. But when I copy it down, I want the records to be reflective of the item cost. All right, so that's an example of a mixed cost. Now, oh, I forgot to put my bracket in, so let me just put a bracket, and I'm going to add my inflation. Now the inflation, when I copy down, I want the $5, and when I copy across, I want the $5. So this one's an example of an absolute reference. So I'm always referring back to that one. So I'm gonna do that calculation first. So that's $105, and then I want to multiply it by the GST. Now the GST, when I copy it down, I want to lock in the row. I don't want it to change. But when I copy it over to from GST to PST, I want the column to move from D to E. So the column is relative, but the row is absolute. So I have to put in a $sign to lock the row. All right, so once I push enter, I come up with the same number I had before, so we know that's right. If I copy it down, it looks correct. If I copy this across, that's correct. And if I copy down again, let's have a look down here at the last number and do an audit here on the formula. So we look at it and it says 210 is the item cost plus that locked in inflationary factor. We do the addition and we multiply it by the PST. So this actually works now. So I've only had to do the formula one time in column D, and it works for all of them now. So this is a good example of how we would use the absolute, a relative, and a mixed reference in a formula. All right, I hope that makes sense, and I will see you guys in class.